The first sign of war wasn't a knock on the door or a notice in the mailbox. It was the faint, mechanical hum of a drone outside the bedroom window. Rachel Donovan was sipping her morning coffee on the porch, her boots still damp with dew from the chicken run, when she heard her wife scream. The kind of scream that carried terror, not annoyance. She rushed inside, heart punching her ribs, just in time to see a shadow slip past the second-story window. A drone, small, black, efficient, hovered less than 3 feet from the glass, tilting like it was peeking in. By the time Rachel reached the front yard, barefoot and adrenaline blind, the drone zipped away like it knew it had been caught. It sailed over the tree line, vanishing toward the trimmed perfection of the HOA subdivision across the way. That's when it clicked. She knew exactly who had been behind the remote. Their property, a modest 8-acre homestead on the outskirts of Gallatin County, Montana, sat just outside the HOA's official boundaries. But, just outside, was apparently too close for Karen Trussell, the self-appointed empress of the Maple Crest Community Association. Karen had never liked Rachel. She didn't like the roosters crowing at dawn. She didn't like the way Rachel parked her vintage tractor in plain view. And she especially didn't like that Rachel's wife, Monica, preferred sunbathing in their private backyard without worrying about judgment or tan lines. Most people with complaints would send a letter. Karen? She sent a drone. At first, Rachel had brushed off the occasional buzzing, figuring it was some bored teenager testing their new toy. But the way the drone hovered, lingered, and tracked, it wasn't a child's game. It was surveillance. Intentional. Calculated. So Rachel did what she always did when something needed to be seen from a distance. She climbed the water tower. Binoculars in hand, she scanned the horizon and caught sight of the drone's descent, straight down Maple Lane, into the manicured backyard of Karen's colonial-style fortress, complete with faux Greek columns and an HOA proud placard sticking out like a smug flag. Karen stood there, arms crossed, waiting for the drone like she was welcoming home a loyal spy. Rachel didn't go over yelling. That wasn't her style. She knocked. Karen answered like she'd rehearsed it. Sweet smile, syrupy tone, and a strategically positioned stance just far enough in the doorway to block the view inside. "Can I help you, Rachel?" she asked, as if nothing strange had happened. Rachel laid it out calmly. The drone had been seen hovering outside her bedroom window. It was trespassing, and it needed to stop. Karen didn't deny it, didn't even flinch. She simply tilted her head and purred. "Well, if everything you're doing is legal, why would a drone bother you?" That sentence alone told Rachel exactly what she needed to know. Karen was recording. She just didn't think she'd get caught. "I won't press charges yet," Rachel said. "But if it happens again, I'll consider my options." Karen smirked. "Suit yourself," she chirped, and closed the door. Rachel didn't wait for it to happen again. That night, she walked into the barn and looked up to the dark wooden rafters where her oldest ally waited. Liberty, a female bald eagle, wings tucked, eyes glinting like gold coins under the moonlight. Rachel had rescued her 5 years ago from an illegal trap off the interstate. She'd applied for every permit imaginable, trained her under ancient falconry traditions passed down from her grandfather. Liberty wasn't just a bird, she was a sentinel. And thanks to an unfortunate incident involving a rival hawk and a weather vane, she held a deep, abiding hatred for anything that flew. "Got a job for you," Rachel whispered. Liberty blinked once, slowly. She was ready. The next morning, the drone returned. 7:12 a.m. sharp. It hovered over the chicken coop, scanned the barn, buzzed low over the garden beds. Rachel was ready with a rake, but missed the first swing. The drone dodged and zipped upward, like it was laughing at her. Liberty let out a low, guttural cry from the rafters. Rachel checked the trail cam footage. The drone had gotten bold, focusing in on Monica's window and the greenhouse. What was it after? Her irrigation grid? The heirloom tomatoes? Or was it just voyeuristic pleasure? That afternoon, Rachel followed the drone's retreat path, cutting through pine and thicket until she saw it land once again in Karen's backyard. This time, Karen wasn't alone. 3 other HOA board members stood around her tablet, watching live footage and laughing. This wasn't curiosity. It was coordinated surveillance. Rachel didn't return to Karen's door. She returned to the barn. Over the next week, she fine-tuned Liberty's training, added motion triggers, fed her fresh trout, conducted sky drills in the hills. She even rigged the porch lights to blink red when the drone entered airspace. She played back hours of drone footage on a monitor, teaching Liberty to follow its flight path, its sound, its shape. By the time the drone returned for round 3, Liberty was a silent shadow tucked beneath the silo roof, waiting. The lights blinked red. The drone crept in. Liberty launched. There was no sound, just a sudden clap of feathers, a metallic clank, and then silence. Rachel stepped outside to find the drone's twisted frame crushed beneath Liberty's talon. She carried it into the workshop and disassembled it. What she found chilled her to the bone. Not just high-def video and audio, but footage of neighbors. Private moments. A teenager sunbathing. Thermal imaging. Zoomed-in windows. Children playing. Karen wasn't spying out of curiosity. She was building a private surveillance empire. Rachel knew what she had to do next. But she also knew Karen wasn't finished. And neither was she. The day the drone war became official didn't start with buzzing. It started with tires crunching gravel. Rachel was unloading feed sacks behind the barn when she heard it. 3 vehicles crept up the driveway like they were arriving for a stakeout, not a neighborly visit. One of them bore the HOA's logo printed like an official seal, though it looked more like a sticker slapped on after a community bake sale. Leading the pack, as always, was Karen Trussell. She stepped out of her SUV wearing a wide sun hat, an oversized clipboard, and a face like she was about to present evidence in a courtroom. Flanking her were HOA board members Jim and Linda, each as painfully predictable as their matching beige cardigans. Jim, the man who once tried to fine an elderly neighbor for placing a single flamingo in their yard. Linda, who lobbied to ban compost because she claimed the smell triggered migraines. And now they were on Rachel's land, clipboards in hand, eyes scanning everything like hawks looking for something to peck. Karen didn't wait for an invitation. "We're conducting a community safety inspection," she announced. Rachel stood still, one boot on the fence rail. "This is an HOA property." Jim grinned, smug. "Actually, it falls within what we call the shared visual influence zone." Rachel blinked. "The what?" "If we can see it," Karen explained slowly, like she was teaching a kindergartner, "we can regulate it." It was absurd. But they weren't here for logic. They were here to provoke. Karen pointed toward the barn. "There's been reports of a large, predatory bird," she said, barely containing her fake concern. "It's intimidating residents. Potentially dangerous. We'd like to inspect." Rachel nearly laughed. "You mean Liberty?" Jim nodded, holding up what looked like a poorly printed ordinance, complete with a Photoshop-quality HOA seal and language that had clearly been typed by someone who'd never read a real law. They wanted to shut Liberty down. And they thought they could do it by pretending to care about public safety. Rachel didn't argue. Instead, she opened the barn. "Let them look." Inside, the scene was far from threatening. Liberty perched regally on her rafter, preening with the air of a seasoned performer. A couple of goats lazily chewed on hay below, unbothered. The only thing aggressive in the entire building was the smell of linseed oil and fresh chicken feed. Karen stepped in cautiously, as if she expected to find a missile silo or a rogue militia. Jim squinted up at Liberty, whispering something to Linda, who had wrapped her scarf around her nose like the air itself might infect her. Rachel stood by the stall, arms crossed. "You're welcome to inspect all you want. You want eggs too." They left in a swirl of discomfort, no doubt disappointed not to find something scandalous. But Rachel could feel it, the way Karen looked back at the silo one last time. She wasn't giving up. She was escalating. That night, Rachel walked the perimeter, checking lights and cameras. Monica was inside reviewing the drone footage they'd recovered. What she found made her pale. The drone had returned again. But this time, it hadn't just hovered. It had skirted the edge of the property, weaving through the blind spots like it had memorized the layout. It had zoomed in on Monica's bedroom window again. And then, worst of all, it had captured footage of their neighbor's teenage daughter sunbathing by the fence line. The drone wasn't just creepy now. It was criminal. Rachel knew this wasn't about chickens or tractors. This was about control. Karen couldn't manage the farm through rules, so she turned to tech, to intimidation, to surveillance. Rachel turned to Liberty. She fed her trout, reviewed training, prepped the net they'd built, woven from old fishing line, waited just right to drop from the air. It was time to show Karen what real aerial superiority looked like. When the drone returned the next morning, it came early, 6:02 a.m., slicing through the low light like a silent knife. A twin-rotor model this time. Sleeker. More expensive. It hovered higher, smartly out of Liberty's dive zone. Rachel watched from the silo's shadow, signaling with a sharp whistle. Liberty launched. But she didn't dive. She circled, gaining altitude, coming up behind the drone like a ghost in the wind. The drone's lights blinked, unaware. Then, with surgical precision, Liberty tilted mid-flight and clipped the drone's rear rotor, just hard enough to unbalance it. The drone spiraled out of the sky, coughing sparks, and crash-landed in the shallow mud behind the goat pin. Liberty circled once more, then perched like a sentry. Rachel retrieved the drone and cracked it open in the workshop. Another SD card. More footage. And this time, it was worse. Clear images of her living room TV. Zooms through neighbor windows. Audio recordings. Thermal imaging. Someone showering. Karen had crossed a line. No. She obliterated it. Rachel didn't call the sheriff this time. She called the neighbor. Together, they watched the footage in his kitchen, both growing darker with every frame. "I'll handle this," he muttered. By nightfall, the entire street was buzzing. The community wasn't divided anymore. They were angry. They were ready. And Rachel had a plan for Phase 2. For 3 full days, the sky above Rachel Donovan's farm held its breath. No buzzing. No blinking lights. No mechanical intrusions slicing across the clouds. It was unnerving, like the eye of a storm had parked itself over Gallatin County, holding its breath just long enough to make people wonder if the worst was over or if it was just regrouping. Even the animals noticed. The goats stopped flinching. The chickens began laying with uncanny punctuality. And Liberty took to perching high on the barn roof again, relaxed but alert, her silhouette a constant presence against the open sky. Beside her, in a rhythm that felt more than coincidence, the wild eagle Rachel had dubbed Justice continued circling. But Rachel didn't believe in coincidence anymore. She believed in escalation. And right on schedule, escalation came, screaming through the sky in the form of a machine that looked like it belonged on a military base, not in a suburban subdivision. It was dusk when it arrived. Rachel was just latching the barn when the rumble began, a new sound, deeper and meaner. Not the whining hum of a hobby drone. No, this was something else entirely. She stepped out into the field and looked up. And there it was, a beast of a drone. Black matte chassis, nearly 3 feet across, with 8 rotors and twin red scanning lights that swept over the corn rows like search beacons. It hovered higher than Karen's previous models, just above Liberty's known dive range. The spotlight mounted underneath pulsed slowly, painting broad circles of cold light across the barn, the coop, the greenhouse, and her wife's bedroom window. Rachel stood firm in the open, hands on her hips, daring it to come closer. It didn't. It didn't need to. The drone was sending a message: "We see you. You're not safe." And it wasn't just surveillance anymore. It was intimidation. The next morning, a flyer appeared, taped to the front gate like a summons. Printed in bold font, signed in Karen's looping penmanship. Emergency HOA meeting. Topic: aggressive wildlife, improper predator containment, and community retaliation threats. Location: Peterson's barn. Thursday, 6 p.m. Rachel almost laughed. Almost. Karen had finally realized she couldn't win with drones, ordinances, or passive-aggressive visits. So now she was trying the oldest trick in the HOA playbook, the smear campaign. She was going to blame Liberty for everything. Make her the villain. Paint Rachel's farm as a danger to the community. And do it publicly. Good. Rachel had always been good at public demonstrations. She spent the next 2 days preparing, rewatching footage, gathering drone wreckage, organizing SD cards, and training Liberty with one final maneuver, the drop net. Rachel and her cousin Derek, a former Air Force drone tech, had constructed the contraption using old fishing line and weighted sinkers. It was designed to snag a drone in flight, disable its rotors, and bring it down without destroying evidence. It was elegant, silent, legal, and perfect. Justice continued trailing Liberty in the skies during training, mimicking her movements like a soldier shadowing a mentor. Rachel still didn't know where the wild eagle had come from, but she didn't question it anymore. Some allies arrive unannounced. Some battles choose you. When the meeting day arrived, Rachel didn't show up empty-handed. She parked her truck in front of Peterson's barn, the so-called neutral ground, unloaded a small crate filled with shattered drone parts, and carried a USB drive in her pocket like a blade. Karen was already there, of course. Sunglasses on. Smile tight. Oversized drone displayed behind her SUV like a showpiece. She greeted guests like a politician, gesturing widely, clipboards swinging like a baton. Her allies hovered near the folding chairs, already whispering. The crowd was split. Old-timers from the county who knew Rachel's reputation, and HOA newcomers who'd been fed just enough paranoia to doubt it. When the meeting started, Karen wasted no time. She rolled out a speech so dramatic it could have won her a community theater award. She listed alleged bird strikes, accused Rachel of weaponizing wildlife, and insisted Liberty posed an imminent threat to public harmony. She even claimed her drone was merely conducting routine safety observation. Rachel let her talk. Then she stepped forward, unsmiling, and set the box of broken drones on the center table with a hard thunk. She plugged the USB into the projector. The barn darkened. The first video began to play. Silence fell like a thunderclap. Footage of the drone hovering inches from windows. Zoomed views of neighbors in their own backyards. Thermal scans from midnight flights. A teenager caught sunbathing. A man barbecuing shirtless. A couple kissing under a porch light. The final clip? Karen herself, visible on a tablet screen, watching the drone feeds with 3 HOA members standing behind her, laughing. Someone in the audience gasped. Someone else whispered, "That's my house." Rachel turned, her voice low but clear. Liberty is a licensed, trained bird, protected under federal wildlife law. She only acts when trespassed against. Unlike Karen's drones, Liberty never violated anyone's privacy. She paused. And unlike Karen, Liberty has never recorded a child in a swimsuit. The shift in the room was seismic. Eyes narrowed, arms folded, chairs scraped backward as board members quietly stepped away from Karen's side. Karen tried to interrupt, claimed it was a community safety program, claimed the drones were just monitoring compliance violations. No one believed her. The vote to remove her from the HOA board wasn't close. Rachel didn't even raise her hand. She didn't need to. That night, the drone came back one last time. Whether it was desperation or one final power move, Rachel didn't know. But there it was, buzzing above the cornfield like it had something to prove. Liberty launched from the silo. Justice followed. 2 shadows against the moon. They didn't dive. Not yet. They waited, hovering high, circling. Then Rachel gave the signal. Liberty struck first, slicing through a rotor with surgical grace. Justice followed with a brutal side slam that shattered another. The drone spiraled downward, belching sparks and smoke, and crashed into Karen's koi pond with a theatrical splash that scattered fish like confetti. Karen stood on her porch and screamed at the sky. Nobody answered. The sheriff arrived the next morning, with a warrant and a formal charge sheet. They say justice moves slow in small towns. That's usually true, but not when a bald eagle is involved. The morning after Karen's drone plunged into her koi pond like a warplane shot from the sky, the sheriff didn't come to chat. He came with a warrant and a deputy in tow. No more chuckles. No more "I'll look into it." This time, he had files in hand, a USB drive full of drone footage, and a list of names. Karen Trussell was arrested on her porch in full view of the HOA community she had once ruled. Her hands trembled as they cuffed her, clipboard still clutched in one of them until a deputy pried it away. Rachel watched from the edge of her driveway, Liberty perched silently behind her, like a feathered gavel bringing down the law. Karen was charged with multiple counts: unauthorized surveillance, invasion of privacy, unlawful recording of minors, violation of state and federal drone regulations. But the real bombshell dropped later that afternoon when the sheriff made a public statement outside the county courthouse. In it, he confirmed what Rachel had already suspected. Karen had been running her drone program for over a year. The footage submitted didn't just come from Rachel's farm. It spanned half the county, suburbs, townhomes, even apartment buildings. Karen had categorized people with file names like potential risk, non-compliant resident, yard violation, ugly fence, obstructive woman, East Field. Dozens of neighbors began coming forward. They remembered odd buzzing sounds, glimpses of flying shadows, flashes of red light in the night. Some even recalled confronting her about it, only to be dismissed or threatened with fines. A few realized that they'd been watched during deeply private moments, changing clothes, showering, embracing loved ones in their own homes. One couple found a drone recording from their backyard barbecue. Another uncovered images of their children in the inflatable pool. Rachel had known Karen was controlling. She hadn't known Karen was watching everything. The media came quickly, The local paper ran the headline, HOA Queen turned Sky Spy. Then a regional news station picked it up. Then a national drone watchdog blog. Within days, Karen became infamous, not just as an overreaching HOA tyrant, but as a symbol of modern suburban surveillance gone rogue. In the fallout, the HOA board scrambled. Karen's allies resigned. The board dissolved. A temporary committee was formed to rebuild the association with actual community input. They tried to offer Rachel a leadership position. She declined. She hadn't fought a war in the skies just to debate hedge heights and mailbox fonts. Instead, she returned to the one place she still trusted, the farm. Life, surprisingly, found a rhythm again. The crops came in early that season. The greenhouse flourished without the watchful eye of a plastic drone above it. Monica returned to sunbathing in peace, this time with Liberty perched nearby like her own personal sky guardian. The chickens clucked contentedly, the goats grew plump, and Rachel spent her afternoons restoring the water tower, the very one where she first spotted Karen's drone. And then there was Justice. The wild eagle didn't leave. He wasn't tamed. He didn't land on command. But he returned, circling high above the barn or resting a few trees away, watching. Sometimes he flew beside Liberty during their training runs. Other times he simply kept his distance, a silent sentinel with no allegiance except instinct and shared skies. Together, Liberty and Justice became local legends. Kids drew them in art class. Someone carved a wooden sculpture of them and donated it to the town park. The 4-H club invited Rachel to give a talk on raptors, wildlife permits, and how to outmaneuver HOA harassment with grace and wings. Then, 1 week after Karen's arrest, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note, shaky cursive on old stationery. The letter was from a man named Raymond Trussell, Karen's father. He'd seen the news. He apologized, said he hadn't spoken to Karen in nearly 2 years, not since she moved into Maple Crest and became someone he no longer recognized. He didn't excuse her actions, but he thanked Rachel, not for stopping her, but for not humiliating her more than she'd already done herself. Folded inside was a photo. A young girl, maybe 7 years old, smiling at a wildlife rescue center, arms wrapped around a juvenile eagle, grinning like her whole world had just taken flight. Rachel stared at it for a long time. It didn't change anything. Karen still weaponized technology against innocent people, still violated lives for control, still deserved everything coming to her in court. But for one flickering second, Rachel saw a thread, a distant, tangled version of the woman who might have once loved the sky the way she did. A thread that snapped, then twisted, until the love turned to ownership. She didn't feel sympathy, but she did feel something she hadn't expected. Closure. Later that evening, Rachel sat in the barn, watching Liberty and Justice perch side by side on the highest rafter. The golden Montana sun bled through the slats, casting beams across the hay. She pulled out her phone and snapped a photo. The local paper published it the next morning. Guardians of the sky, Liberty and Justice soar over a freed farm. And this time, there were no drones to interrupt the sunrise. There was a strange peace in the air. Not silence. Farms are never truly silent, but peace. A kind of slow-moving calm that seeped into the soil and settled deep into the bones. For the first time in weeks, Rachel didn't wake to the sound of rotors buzzing over the greenhouse or Monica's bedroom window. She didn't patrol the fence line every evening with binoculars or adjust motion sensors around the coop. Liberty still flew her daily routes, but now they were more about freedom than defense. Justice, ever the stoic shadow, trailed her from above, forming a silent patrol over the land. The skies were theirs again. No more surveillance. No more synthetic watchers. Just feathers, wind, and trust. And while the courts prepared to prosecute Karen Trussell for everything from unlawful surveillance to child endangerment, Rachel returned to the life she'd fought to protect. She turned Liberty's skills into education. Every Saturday morning, the barn filled with curious families from nearby towns. Parents held toddlers on their shoulders while Rachel demonstrated Liberty's flight maneuvers. She explained the basics of falconry, the importance of wildlife rehabilitation, and how federal permits weren't just pieces of paper, they were promises. Justice never landed near the crowd, but he always hovered nearby, like an uninvited guardian who chose to stay because he wanted to, not because anyone asked. Kids begged Rachel to tell the story of how the Eagles had taken down the drones. Some drew pictures of Liberty wearing superhero masks. Others asked if liberty and justice were married. Rachel laughed every time. They're partners, she always said. In the sky, that's all that matters. One afternoon, the sheriff showed up unexpectedly. He wasn't in uniform. No flashing lights. Just a man walking up the gravel path with a small wooden box in his hand. Got something for you, he said, handing it over with an awkward smile. Inside was a silver medal on a blue ribbon, etched into the front, for outstanding service in the protection of privacy and personal property. Liberty, Gallatin County Sky Sentinel. Rachel burst out laughing, not because it was a joke, but because it was perfect. She hung the certificate right above Liberty's perch in the barn. Liberty didn't react. She fluffed her feathers and returned to preening, unimpressed but visibly content. Karen never returned to the neighborhood. After her court hearing, she quietly sold her home and moved out of state. Some said she planned to live near her sister. Others whispered she was changing her name. A few online forums theorized she was trying to sue the drone manufacturer for not warning her about birds of prey. Nobody cared. Karen had become a footnote, a warning, not a legacy. But the impact she left behind remained, in strange, subtle ways. The HOA board was reformed entirely, this time built from volunteers chosen by actual residents. Their first act? Rewriting the bylaws to explicitly ban any form of aerial surveillance, including hobby drones. The new clause was dubbed informally the Liberty Provision. It passed unanimously. Life on the farm settled into a rhythm that Rachel hadn't realized she'd missed. Mornings were spent tending the fields, tuning the irrigation system, and prepping the greenhouse for the early fall cycle. Monica's herbal garden thrived, partly because the soil was good, but mostly because she could finally relax. In the evenings, Rachel sat on the porch, sometimes with Monica, sometimes with nothing but a thermos and the sound of wings slicing overhead. She didn't glance nervously at the sky anymore, because Liberty was always out there. And where Liberty flew, justice wasn't far behind. One particular evening, just as the horizon turned molten orange, Rachel spotted something new, a third eagle. Young, smaller. It followed Liberty from a distance, unsure but curious. She didn't say anything, just smiled. The next morning, Rachel opened her mailbox and found another letter. This one wasn't from Karen's father. It was from a girl named Abby, age 12, from a nearby county. Inside was a handwritten note and a drawing of two eagles standing over a broken drone with flames behind them. Dear Miss Rachel, I used to be scared of everything, even birds. But now I think eagles are awesome and strong and smart. I want to be like Liberty when I grow up. I'm making a science project about privacy and birds. Thank you for being brave. Rachel folded the letter gently, her eyes lingering on the final line. Thank you for being brave. It hit her then. This hadn't just been about Karen, or drones, or even Liberty. It had been about power, who thinks they're entitled to watch, to judge, to control, and who chooses to stand up and say, no, not here, not on my land. Rachel hadn't asked to be the symbol of that resistance. But now she carried it, not with speeches, not with lawsuits, but with wings. In the following months, Rachel was invited to speak at local schools, community meetings, and even a state wildlife summit. She told her story simply, how an HOA president tried to rule the skies, and how a woman, a barn, and two eagles told her no. Her closing message was always the same. You don't need drones to protect your home. You need awareness, boundaries, and sometimes, feathers sharper than any camera lens. And so the farm thrived. The sky stayed clear. The community grew stronger. And in Gallatin County, whenever someone spotted two eagles soaring together, one proud, one wild, they didn't just see birds anymore. They saw liberty and justice. Guardians of the sky. Symbols of peace earned, not given. And proof that even in the quietest corners of America, freedom still has wings.